The next machine I want to discuss with you are bandsaws. We have two of them here that are primarily the same. They're 14-inch bandsaws. If you can operate one of them safely, you can operate both of them safely because the functioning is pretty much the same on these bandsaws. The bandsaws are primarily used for cutting out irregular shapes. It can be for cutting curves, cutting out toys. We use them mostly just for cutting out shapes for our toys that we make here in the shop. We can cut circles on them. We can cut wheels on them with special jigs that we have on the wall here. I will demonstrate one of those in a while. But first I want to show you some basics of operating the bandsaw. I said these are some of the items that we can cut with them. To use the bandsaw, one of the things that we do is the same as with other machines. There is a safety guide for how far these blocks should be above the wood you're cutting. You don't use it with the blade exposed up there. That's way too dangerous. Plus you're twisting and bending on the blade, so you won't end up with an accurate cut, and depending on how severe the twisting is, you will break the blades. So you want to drop this guide down so that it just is like 1/4 of an inch above the wood, similar to what we did on the table saws. Okay, so as long as the board slides around through it freely, not hitting any of the other parts of the saw, that's all you need. Also, it keeps you from running your hand into that blade. Okay? Like any machine that cuts wood, it'll cut fingers. So you want to keep your fingers away from the blade. I am going to just demonstrate some of the types of curves that this will cut. Again, I'm going to have to turn the vacuum cleaner on because if I don't, this is throwing sawdust all over the place. I've already stated this is one of the toys that we make, and primarily it's cut out on the bandsaw by hand. It's not something we've automated yet. I've taken and traced parts of that out on this thin piece of plywood, and I'm going to show you the process of sawing that out on the bandsaw. Again, the same as everything else that we do, there is the part of the project that we're going to save, and then there's a part that is scrap wood. We want to cut it out on the waste side of the line. When you first start using a bandsaw, you want to stay a good distance away from that pencil line. After you've had a lot of practice, you'll get so you can come up fairly close to the pencil line, but leave the pencil line. Okay? The saw will go around fairly sharp corners, but sometimes the corners are a little too sharp to go around, and that's where you end up using creative thinking about how to get around that corner. On this end of the board, I'm just going to do some practice cuts to show you just how tight a corner some of these bandsaws can do for you. Okay? Good puzzle piece. Now with a finer tooth blade, you can turn even a sharper curve than what that one shows. But that curve is equivalent to some of the curves that we've got in this particular toy that we're going to saw pieces out, so we can make some of them. When we get down to this part of it, we know we can't go around the square corner with the bandsaw. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a straight cut in from the edge into here someplace and cut that out. Then I'll come back and cut this curve. Okay. I've cut in on both sides, which is straight. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to cut in on this curve down to meet those, hopefully. Okay. I've come pretty close to the pencil line on that one. That one I decided to leave it a little more. I'm going to try to cut and leave these edges a little more. And that's, as a beginner, that's what you want to try to do. Because if you try cutting to the pencil line and you discover that your hand isn't steady enough to hold it there, you cross the pencil line, and like anything else, if you cross the pencil line, the piece is already too small and we can't use it. So we're going to stay on the outside of the waist side of those pencil lines. Okay? When you're doing this type of cutting, do not hurry. Take your time. And if you do, you can end up with a fairly accurate cut. If you look closely, you can still see my pencil line on the edge of the wood. One of the processes that we will do eventually is we use oscillating spindle sander to sand those edges down smooth. We're not going to get into that today. We're just doing the bandsaw cutting. Okay, now I'll try to do the same cut coming around here to get that top done. could be a whale's tail or most anything at this point. All I've got to do now is to cut this side and it would match. The saw does leave a rough edge on the cut because of the coarseness of the blades. If you use a finer toothed blade, you'd end up with a much smoother cut. I don't worry about it on this type of a project because all of our toys, we will end up cutting the edges so there are no sharp edges on the toys. We either use this on the sanders or on a round over router. Okay? Now some don'ts with the saw. You've seen what do's. We've talked about cutting outside the pencil line, leaving your pencil line on there. But there are some situations and occasionally where somebody is trying to cut into a real sharp corner. They get the blade caught. They know they can't finish making the corner and get out of it, but they don't want to saw the leg off from an animal or something. So they take and try to back the blade up. If you can focus the camera over here, I will show you what happens when you back the blade up. Number one, it pulls the blade off the wheel. Number two, it saws into your blade guard, and then it breaks the blade. We don't want that happening. The bandsaws weren't made to cut off steel parts of the machine itself. They're made just to cut the wood. So do not try to back your wood out away from the blade while the blade is still turning. If you have to do that, shut the machine off and then very carefully, without the blade turning, back your piece of wood off from the blade. And then you can correct what your problem was. Okay? As I've also said, you don't go sliding your fingers in under there. Cuts wood, it'll cut fingers. Okay? You don't leave the blades set way up high, which I often come in the morning and find them left that way. If I'm standing here talking to the cameraman or to my assistant here, and I stick my hand up here, guess where my hand is? Right up against that saw blade. And if I wasn't doing it on purpose, who knows how much I'd have cut the side of my hand. That's because, number one, somebody didn't put the blade down when they were through using it. Number two, I didn't pay attention to where I was putting my hand. Okay? So that's another do not do. Okay? So you do not leave the blades up. You do not leave the saw covered with sawdust and chips of wood. With any machine you use, you should clean it up as soon as you're through. So when you come back to use it again, you've got a clean machine, or if somebody else is sharing your shop, they don't have to stop and clean up your mess before they can use it. Okay? The other thing that I would caution is, until you are experienced at knowing how to set the blades, how to set the guides, how to set the pressure rolls, do not touch them. Let somebody that knows how they're supposed to be adjusted do the adjusting. Okay? Because if you don't have these blocks set right, the blade can wander. If you get them too tight, it binds the blade and the blade won't turn easily. If you get the pressure roll set different on the top than it is the bottom, it can force the blade off from the pulley wheels, or it allows you to push the blade back further than it's supposed to be pushed. Those pulley wheels, bearings, idle bearings, are supposed to be there to keep the blade running true and keeping it running straight. If those aren't set right, the blade can do all sorts of strange and weird cuts on you that you really don't want. So don't play around with the adjustments until you learn how to set them properly. And there's many books and instructions out that can share that with you. There's many people that have had experience with bandsaws that can assist you with doing that.